Hi, everyone. Sorry, we had a bit of a false start there. So today this is Topics in Graph Data Science, and this is a series that we've been running on LinkedIn Live, and now we're expanding our reach to newer platforms, including YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and what else do we've got? We've got Big Marker going. We've got a number of different audiences that we're connecting with today. Joining us shortly will be Varun Shenoy from Stanford University. He's been working on a pretty exciting graph connection between graph databases and GraphGPT. I know, let me see. He should be with us in just a minute. As I said, we had to restart. So here we are. So I want to talk a little bit in general about the concept of knowledge graphs and where it's coming from and how he went through and connected that. So a knowledge graph is a way of visualizing information. We've been talking a lot about using our data as far as the actual data is concerned. We looked at PageRank algorithms. We looked at centrality. We looked at a number of different things. But what you can also do is you can use graphs as a way to visualize knowledge. So think of it, my son is a visual learner. Right. So when he's working on new topics in World War II, or he was recently doing it with World War I, what he likes to do, and I enjoy doing too, is he will use Post-its and put them out onto the wall and draw connections between different things. So maybe it's the Axis, maybe it's the Allies. And so for him to understand the dynamics of history in particular, he goes through and leverages knowledge graphs. So what we're talking about today, Varun's going to be with us. He went through and talked a little bit about how he'll be with us in just a second. Sorry about that. So he went through and said, okay, well, what do we have available to us now with GraphGPT? And what do we know about knowledge graphs? And what would it look like? How easily could we put something together? And one of the things I find really interesting is when we're talking about different types of learners, specifically visual learners, that we as practitioners in the graph space can actually offer a lot of insight and ways of providing that information so that it can be easily understandable. Whether it's in your PowerPoint presentation, in your slide deck, we all know what the power of visualization is. So what we're talking about today is how do we couple this truly democratized AI of GraphGPT and this concept of knowledge graphs so that we can see how they work together. So it looks like he's hopping in the studio any second. All right. Just want to start out. Does anybody have any questions so far or anything that they want us to talk about today? All right. So let's see. We've got, look who's here. Varun, welcome. So sorry about the technical difficulties.
No worries.
So I was just talking a little bit about knowledge graphs in general, as well as I was looking at them from the perspective of for visual learners. So I was just kind of talking about that a little bit. But what I'd love for you to do is go ahead and introduce yourself. As I mentioned earlier, I'm Allison Cosette. I am the developer advocate at Neo4j, where we talk all things graph in our topics in graph data science. And I'm pleased to have Varun here with us today. So why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what brings you to join us here today at Topics in Graph Data Science.
Yeah, totally. Hi, everyone. I'm Varun. I'm currently a undergrad student at Stanford. Been spending the last couple of months exploring large language models and recently built a project around automatically generating graphs from unstructured data in the context of just language. So being able to take kind of a long blurb of text and automatically convert it into a language graph using large language models such as GPT-3, and maybe I'll be playing with GPT-4 this upcoming week and see how that does.
Excellent. So I'm curious, when we talk about knowledge graphs, I was talking about them in the academic setting. Did you find when you were going through your undergrad that knowledge graphs as a learning tool came up at all with any of your classwork?
Yeah, that's a good question. Surprisingly, no.
Mm,
It took a lot of kind of math and engineering classes, and
mm,
uh, it might be due to kind of the quarter system here, where things just move very fast,
yeah.
and we we try to pretty much skim every piece of subject matter. Um, never really came up, but a lot of graphs did, right? I
Mm.
think so. Graphical representations. Um, the reason I was sort of interested in this problem was because I was investigating language models and seeing if they had a strong ability to maintain state. And graphs tend to be a pretty complicated type of state. So being able to successfully understand and parse graphs and update them would be a pretty cool example of what these models are capable of doing.
So tell me about how this particular project came to be for you, because I think it's a really interesting story.
Yeah, I built it like in a couple hours in a weekend, mainly because, and the project is GraphGPT. And the reason was, as mentioned, I was very curious about the state maintaining capabilities of these models. I was at a hackathon a couple weeks before, and my teammates and I had a lot of trouble figuring out how to properly manage state for. Um, you could think of it as like DoorDash, but you just text DoorDash, right? So everyone's been in the situation where you have to go order Chipotle for like a ton of people, and everyone has super specific orders. And you want to make sure you don't mess anything up, because if you do, then you might cost your friendships. Um, and we just had a really hard time figuring out how to sort of navigate the state. So um, coming off of that, I was like, sort of the question in the limit, like what kind of stuff could you do with language models in terms of um, updating itself over time? And I think knowledge graphs kind of lend themselves very easily to this kind of problem. I was like, okay, let's just see if this is possible. I had sort of no real interest in knowledge graphs before this. And, this is really cool. And to be honest, I didn't expect people to find it terribly interesting. I just wanted to share it and see what people thought, and people loved it.
We all loved it. I was super excited. We've been you've been a busy man lately, so we're really happy that you're able to have time for us today. If you wouldn't mind, is it possible for you to bring up a demo for us today?
Yeah, totally.
Awesome.
Let's see.
We do. For those who are interested, it is available on GitHub. I'll drop that into the comments in the chat for everyone so that you can access it. There's so if you want to see what it looks like as well, so you can check that out. Oh, here we go. All right.
Great. Let's see. Yeah, so this is just GraphGPT Vercel. So if you want to play with it, go for it. All you need is an OpenAI key, which you can get from OpenAI. I already have that entered here. Taking a bunch of philosophy classes this quarter, so I kind of had this Wikipedia page pulled up already. You can, for example, grab all this text about political theory from Jean-Jacques Rousseau. You can just enter that directly into describing your graph. You can go ahead and see what this ends up doing. Thinking for a while, and then boom, it generates a graph. And it tells you some information. And you can basically put in anything else you want there. Like, one thing I had a lot of fun with is going to TV shows or movies, grabbing the synopses of those, because they generally describe the relations between characters pretty well. And you get one of those charts that you might have seen in kind of a high school lit class, where you're trying to see how different characters are related and how that plays out over the course of a novel.
I love it. I love it, especially when things are really complicated. I remember being in high school when we were reading, deep Russian literature. I would always feel a little overwhelmed by all the characters, and so if I had only had this then,
we can try it, right?
There we go. I mean, that's what's so great about it. And one of the things that when you and I chatted previously, what I love is this idea that you were curious and you went out and just built something. Right. And this idea that in the state that we live in, with a modest amount of, you have a lot of knowledge, you're about to graduate, but for those who have perhaps a more modest amount of coding ability, to be able to go through and build something that's so useful, like GraphGPT that you have here, is just really impressive. The real question is there a way that you can save what comes up in your GraphGPT?
Yeah. So here we go. Uh,
Oh,
this
fantastic.
is from just a couple of the sub books from Brothers Karamazov. Um,
Nice.
this seems to be like an artifact of the language model itself, which is you
How
sometimes can
interesting.
get these, but you can delete them. But yeah, you can go ahead and just save the image, right, as you would save any other image.
I love it.
Um,
I
but
love
yeah, you
it. I'm
can
gonna
kind of play with it, and yeah.
I was telling everyone earlier about the way my son does his knowledge graphs because he's a huge history buff. But when he's trying to understand all the different players through World War One or World War Two, he puts post-its up on the wall and sort of like draws lines between them. So this will certainly make his life a little bit easier as a learning tool. Um, so tell me a little bit about what it's been like for you since you put out GraphGPT, because I know there was a lot of response really quickly. What has that been like for you as a graduating student?
Y- Oh,
Oh, sorry. Meant to share that link with you. I will get on that. I will post that while you're chatting with our folks and telling them a little bit about what it's been like for the last couple of weeks for you.
yeah, totally. Yeah, just been mostly kind of exploring the space and seeing what's cool to build there. Having conversations with people who find knowledge graphs is very interesting, people who are kind of new to the language model space and very curious about it. And I think like trying to explain a lot of the time the limitations that these models do have, I think like a very unique perspective that a lot of my peers and I have is we have a lot of freedom in terms of exploration and how we spend our free time because we're not
Mm-hmm.
sort of beholden to normal jobs. So we
Yet.
just yet, hopefully not. We'll see. Um, but playing with these models is like the only way to learn what they're capable of.
Yeah.
And based off of that, it's always an interesting question to ask. What are some things that you can do with them that other people haven't discovered yet? And I think
Mm-hmm.
that's why people really enjoyed this graph perspective because no one had really tried it before.
Mm.
So a lot of interesting questions in that regard, and kind of continuing to explore and see what's possible. And a lot of questions about, you know, are there opportunities to build things of value around these models? Are they going to be owned by OpenAI and similar large language model foundation companies actually build
Mm-hmm.
these models and serve them? It's a very unique time, and a lot of people are comparing it to kind of the advent of the smartphone or cloud computing. It's one of those fundamental technology shift moments, and I think
Yes.
it's going to change the way we do a lot of our daily tasks in the
Yeah.
next couple of years.
As someone who's a little bit older than you by quite a bit, I've been around for a number of these pivotal moments, and I definitely see this in the same manner that there is this moment where now historically AI has been something that we've all been working on for years and obviously you've been learning about, but it's the first time I feel that people have been able to sort of drivers in the seat of something like to the open public. So if obviously this is a really graph friendly community here, but I was curious when we talk about the limitations of the LLMs and of these large language models, being someone who we understand, training and testing and, all of this is built on what's existed in the past. What do you see as a piece of information that you think maybe non-data scientists who are using large language models might want to be aware of or keep in mind?
Yeah, I think like something really key is recognizing that these things can be brittle. So you have to be very clever with how you come up with the prompts.
Mm,
At the end of the day, all they're doing is guessing what the next word is.
yeah.
But if you train it with enough parameters and enough compute and enough data, you get kind of these, they're called emergent abilities, almost magical. They're able to do these
Mm,
really interesting things, especially when you tune them to human instructions specifically.
mhm.
So being able to tell it to generate a graph based on this text, and then you give it a couple of examples of what text might look like and what the resulting graphs are.
Mm,
And then you kind of have to specify what kind of data you want at the output, right? These are text models. So they're generating text, and graphs aren't inherently text. So thinking of how do you actually create a textual output that can be ingested by an application,
Yeah.
whether that's like JSON or some kind of dot notation that graphs may be represented in.
I'm also wondering about this idea of, because I don't know exactly how you built it, but I'm imagining that there's some entity recognition and then some relationship recognition that's going on in there. And I'm just sort of wondering, have you sort of had a sort of like a Cinderella scenario of what you think this might be able to do in the near term?
Yeah. So here, like the insane part about like these large language models is there's no explicit entity recognition or like relationship finding. It's basically you write a prompt and it's able to do a lot of these things automatically, often at a state-of-the-art level compared to models that are kind of solely trained on doing this. And that's just the power of
Fascinating.
raw compute and data, right? It's trained on probably like a tenth of the whole internet, or probably even more than that. There's probably a lot of private data sets they're able to get a hold of and basically train these models to get them as big as they can, but also maintaining speed and making sure that it's snappy. Yeah, I'm sorry, I forgot the question exactly.
I was just sort of thinking about what you thought might be possible with this particular application. There's the Cinderella story in the long term, but do you have sort of a near term that you would like to see it evolve to?
Yeah, lots of interesting things. I think like a lot of people are really focused on kind of first order effects when there are kind of secondary and third order effects that you can play with and build right now, but it's just a little bit more complicated, a little bit more brittle. It's harder to build sort of solid products with these yet because they kind of just guess, right? So sometimes they can be pretty wrong, and you don't want wrong outputs in a product.
Yeah.
So for one example is like agentic behavior, right? Like if you want a language model to go do tasks for you or access tools like a calculator, you don't want it to hallucinate, for example, right? These language models are great in making stuff up. If you play with GraphGPT, it'll happily tell you lies with a straight face.
Yes.
And way you can circumvent this is by grounding it in truth, by giving it access to the internet, right? From these articles, try and distill a summary of this event that happened after your training cutoff date, right? So like the data that ChatGPT is trained on is up to like September 2021 or something along those lines. But if I want to sort of understand the event after, and I don't want it to just kind of lie and make stuff up, can give it access to the internet. If I wanted to do some interesting kind of calculations, don't get it to do the math on its own through next token prediction. Like that's not likely to do well, but give it access to a calculator, right? And then it can say like, here's some code, some Python code that you can run, and it'll get you the right answer. And it's incredibly good at generating code, for example.
Yes.
So you can execute that and get the right answer, and then feed it back to the prompt. And it's kind of called leveraging tools or chaining. There's a lot of terms that people are trying to come up with and building infrastructure and different projects to help with this.
So just a couple more things. You mentioned that you weren't necessarily in the graph space before this all happened. Has that changed for you? Or I know that you've got another cool thing that you just released that I wanted to talk about as well. But has your love of graph grown?
I think like something really interesting that I didn't realize was there's actually an incredible amount of synergy between graphs and language models. And kind of just for some quick background, one big technical limitation of these models is that they have a limited context window. So when you write a prompt and ask for output, there's only so many tokens or words. So approximately about 4,000 words can be processed at a time. And anything outside that window, for example, if you want to analyze a very long book or a long essay that's longer than that context window, it'll just forget. Like it wouldn't have the ability to remember that. What graphs do is they provide a pretty great option for long-term memory for these models, which means as you sort of read, for example, a very long book, you can generate a graph and keep that graph kind of in cold storage or memory, but not in the language model, right? keep it on the client side or something like that. And whenever you're summarizing or reading forward, you can update the graph. And then when you ask questions about the essay, you can create queries on the graph first, take data from the graph, and then some parts of the essay and synthesize it together. So there's a lot of interesting work being done in one, brute forcing the context window size. So OpenAI is coming out with an 8K context window and 32K context window, which are both very expensive. So it's still not very practical for most people just kind of hacking around. But there are long-term memory opportunities with graphs that I do think a lot of projects are using right now, actually.
Nice. I love it. I mentioned something else that you've been working on recently, and I just thought it was great. Can you talk to us about OralBite?
Yeah, totally. It's kind of a fun project I sort of thought of with a couple of friends, realizing that everyone's on these like short form video platforms all the time, especially Gen Z loves TikTok and Instagram Reels and YouTube Shorts. But a lot of us still listen to podcasts, and I think podcast discovery is very difficult. A lot of people have tried to build kind of TikTok for podcasts, but it never seems to catch on. And kind of the reason is you don't have the TikTok algorithm, and you just don't have the network effects and distribution that TikTok already has. So being able to provide a way for audio influencers, whether they're podcasts, music, whatever, to create short form video with very minimal thinking, just basically splice up the video, generate something that looks nice, that could show up on a feed, and someone would reasonably want to look further into it if it's an interesting clip. And that's like, there's a lot of interesting like UI questions about can audio be as visually addicting as an actual video? And if so, like what does that mean? Like how do you actually make it look like that? So just use a ton of video, lots of waveforms, captions are a must, things like that.
I love it. Well, we'll have to test it out with Graph Stuff FM, which is our Neo4j like graph nerd podcast. So what's next for you? You mentioned that you're coming up on the end of your undergraduate work. What does the future look like for Varun Shenoy?
Yeah, it's a great question, one that I ask myself a lot. I
remember what it was like to be graduating from college. I understand. You may not know for certain, but we'd love to hear sort of what's on your mind these days.
Yeah, totally. Super unclear. I just kind of want to work on cool things and build with friends. Like it's pretty straightforward.
I love it.
But sort of figure out how that actually leads to a stable career is going to be interesting. So a lot of us are in a similar boat here. Just talking about it, figuring it out. Probably have a better idea in the next couple of months. Probably very close to graduation.
Well, please keep us informed. We're so glad that you could come on today. I put up the link for your GraphGPT as well as OralBite. Thank you so much for your time. It was great to have you here, and we wish you all the best with what comes forward. And I can tell you there's decades of Silicon Valley history that shows you what happens when friends get together and build cool things. So I hope that you're that next story.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, Allison. It was great chatting.
All righty, all. Thank you so much for joining us today. We look forward to future episodes of Topics in Graph Data Science, and we will see you all soon. Take care.